Welcome back to the Descartes Daily Talks, the podcast, the place for the deepest talks on philosophical concepts. My guest today is from Tufts University, the famous Dennet.
Hey, thanks for having me on the podcast, Mr. Descartes.
Please call me Rene.
Well, thank you, Rene, for having me on the podcast.
This week, we'll be continuing our series on the mind-body problem, and my friend Daniel Dennet will share his insights on this interesting topic.
Wow, I love this topic. I love talking about the mind.
Great. To start off, we should probably talk about what the mind or conscious is. I'm sure you have a great answer to this since you wrote a whole book about it.
I don't say consciousness is non-existent. I just think that in the grand scheme of things, your consciousness is insignificant. The only support for that conviction that you are not a zombie is the vehemence of the conviction itself. And as soon as you allow the theoretical possibility that there could be zombies, you have to give up your papal authority about your own non-zombiehood.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. Like the way you incorporated zombies into it, I personally believe that the mind is like a substance that thinks and learns.
That's interesting. Since you brought it up, do you mind if we talk about how the mind works?
Sure, sounds like a great topic. So I'd like to first state that the mind doesn't only learn from the senses, so I wholeheartedly agree with Aristotle. I don't disagree, however, that the senses are important, but that isn't the only source of knowledge. For example, mathematics and metaphysics are topics that don't rely on the senses, but yet we make sense of it through our intellect. This kind of knowledge that doesn't come from the senses I like to call pure intellect.
Interesting. For about 100 years before me, the world of philosophers had a thing called a qualia. Qualia is a thing that supposedly create the mind. They are the properties of perception. Sensations in the body like pain and hunger are qualias in the feeling of self. However, I don't think that qualias exist. For qualia to actually exist, it has to be a component of an experience. This means that it must be one possible to know that a change in qualia has occurred, as opposed to a change in something else. Or two, that there is a difference between having a change in qualia and not having one. You are not able to prove a change in a qualia through observation or introspection. This is because to find change, you must compare the current qualia to the old qualia. That will work if human minds didn't have a tendency to change memories based on current qualias. Another way to think about this is using a thought experiment created by Frank Jackson, Mary the color scientist. In this scenario, Mary had only lived in a black and white room, learning from a TV that is black and white. She learns all that there is about color, so when she steps outside to see the color red for the first time, does it contribute to her understanding of color? I say no. If she already truly knew everything about color, that knowledge would include a deep understanding of why and how human neurology causes us to sense the quale of color. Mary would therefore already know exactly what to expect of seeing red before ever leaving the room. However, Mary's failure of feeling what it is like to see the color red, much like that of a computer or robot, might be a failure in language. I wrote an article already explaining the cosciences yet. In it, I said, if one dubs this inevitable residue qualia, then qualia are guaranteed to exist, but they're just more of the sense, dispositional properties that have not yet been entered in the catalog. So, I do not think qualias exist unless the language is just unable to comprehend them.
While qualias are way ahead of my time and it only scratches the surface on what a mind is, looking further in another direction about the mind, we can look into the effects of the mind and body onto each other. Interactionism.
As I said in an interview before this, you were really the father of dualism. You did a very interesting thing. You said, first of all, only human beings have minds. Animals don't have minds. They were just fancy clockwork. And we're a lot of fancy clockwork too. There's lots of just mechanical processes going on in our bodies. But then in addition to these fancy processes, there's a special, and even to you, mysterious link to an immaterial mind. In fact, the only thing that you said couldn't be explained mechanically is what we're doing right now, having an intelligent conversation.
Well, I believe this quote from my work, Discourse, sums up my thoughts on this problem. I saw that, well, I could pretend that I had no body, and that there was no world and no place for me to be in. I could not for all that pretend that I did not exist. From this I knew I was a substance whose whole existence or nature is simply to think, and which does not require any place or depend on any material thing in order to exist.
Even though you are the father of dualism, as time has passed, there have been many other theories as to the mind-body problem.
Yes, I have seen many of them, but I am still convinced that my theory is correct. Many of these theories wonder, if the body and mind are distinct, then how do they interact? And my answer to that is, the mind is tethered to the body at the pineal gland. All mind-body interactions are filtered through that portal, if you will, between the mind and the body. Now, like you said, there are many new theories about this problem, but I will address some of them. The idea of reductive physicalism, I believe, is completely false. As in my thought experiment, because I can't cast doubt on my mind because of the fact that I'm thinking, my mind must exist. But is the mind a physical thing? We cannot say that it is. Epiphenomenalism is one theory I believe in, as this theory follows my thought that the mind and body are distinct. Our mind and thoughts can't affect what our physical body looks like.
Interesting. I might agree with you on Epiphenomenalism, as it talks about how the body affects the mind, and the mind does not affect the body, since I think that the conscious is insignificant.
Great. Well, seems like we've reached our time for this segment. Thank you so much for the talk. Really appreciate your insight.
No problem. I really enjoyed our talk as well, and hope to come back on the podcast soon.
Make sure to follow my man Daniel Dennet on Twitter at Daniel Dennet, all lowercase. And a big shout out to his school also on Twitter at Philosophy Tufts. And I'll see y'all tomorrow again on another Descartes Daily Talks, the podcast.